Good evening to everyone. Assalamu alaikum and blessings of peace. I'm Raha, the Outreach and Program Manager here at Minaret Foundation. I just want to take a moment and thank you guys for taking the time out to join us today, and I look forward to connecting with you guys. In our great city of Houston, we're blessed with a variety of cultures, faiths, and perspectives that make our city unique. Our diversity is a strength, and it's something we brag about to our friends and family in faraway places, which is probably not helping our traffic situation. We should be bragging about our weather instead. Our diversity is a familiar friend, from restaurants of every country and language programs in our schools to how business is conducted in our city. Although, if left untapped and unmanaged, this diversity could become a foe, being a source of discord and division within our community. We do not need to look too far to see the cultural turbulence diversity can create. Recent events in our nation have shown that diversity could quickly become a point of division. Part of the problem is that often we're left talking only about our diversity, which just means that we can all go to our own Malaysian, Pakistani, Persian, Venezuelan, and French restaurants in Houston. But where we need to be going is to each other's Malaysian, Pakistani, Persian, Venezuelan, and French restaurants. But Harvard says that pluralism is a response to diversity, to learn and engage the meaningful differences between our cultures and identities. Houston faith communities can play a pivotal role in noting our plurality as a strength. Faith can unite and inspire us regardless of our differences. In our places of worship, we find common values of love, compassion, and understanding that bind us together as a community. Within these sacred spaces, we can foster dialogue and connections across diverse faiths, inspiring a culture of inclusion and understanding. We can break down the barriers that often divide us, be they racial or religious, and create a united front against those seeking to use our diversity against us. And that's what we do at Minaret Foundation. We bring faith communities together to change the world around us. In a world where differences often take center stage, we must recognize that Muslims, Christians, Jews, and people of all faiths have far more in common than that divides us. At the core of each belief system lies a commitment to values like love, compassion, and the pursuit of a just and peaceful world. These shared ideas are a testament to our shared humanity. Each of our scriptures discusses loving each other despite our differences, speaking the truth even amongst difficulty, and justice for those we care for, and even for those whom we do not. At Minaret Foundation, the first part of what we do is bringing communities together through barbecue, discussion, and dodgeball. After that, we answer the age-old question. We've held hands and sang Kumbaya. What do we do next? For us, the next step is coming together to engage in public policy. We could have chosen to make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches or work on building a house together, but those commitments are only a few hours each. When we walk together for systemic change, it takes anywhere between 6 and 18 months, which gives us time to deepen and widen our opportunities for understanding and inclusion. The areas that we focus on are child welfare, food insecurity, and religious freedom. All of our faith traditions emphasize the need to take care of all children, not just our own, and to help our neighbors who are hungry. And one of the cornerstone principles of our nation is the ability to practice our faith freely. The policies that we work on are policies that are considered low-hanging fruit, cost next to nothing, and bring people together. Instead of increasing the divide, they have to be radically in the center, bipartisan. We've brought together individuals from faith communities around the state to engage in 12 interfaith and public policy committees. And our model of relationship building is expanding into Dallas and Austin in the first quarter of 2024, inshallah, God willing. Through dialogue, understanding, and shared values, we've demonstrated that when we unite, there is no limit to what we can achieve for the betterment of our city and our state. In this past legislative session, we brought together faith communities from a diverse set of backgrounds and beliefs to collaborate on passing not one, but 5 important laws signed by Governor Abbott. Minaret Foundation is the only Muslim-led organization to do so in 20 years. The result of our policies can be seen throughout the state of Texas. No child in Texas 10 years of age or younger will be restrained in handcuffs. All judges in our state have to undergo family violence training. There will be no more standardized exams on religious holidays. Parents will no longer need to jump through hoops to get an excused absence marked for their child's religious holidays. They will simply need to write a letter of absence. Our specific policies and programs are identified through deep and thorough research of each area, and working with our communities of faith and lay leaders, community members, and stakeholders to identify our next projects. Regarding child welfare, we're working on 3 critical projects. We're working on a program we introduced in the legislature called Handle with Care, which creates a notification mechanism between law enforcement and schools in case a child experiences significant trauma outside of school. I'm proud to say that we're running the largest pilot in the nation between HISD and HPD. And with the support of leaders such as District Attorney Kim Ogg and others, we are in the process of expanding the pilot to 4 more school districts in Harris County and the Gulf Coast. Gun safety has also become a priority as we seek to identify ways to arm physicians in family practice settings with educational materials and blister packs of trigger locks for their patients. And lastly, for the reason we're here today, we've identified juvenile mental health and specifically specialty courts as a means to better the lives of tremendously underserved population. These endeavors reflect our commitment to creating a better future for all, where every child is nurtured, no one goes to bed hungry, and everyone can practice their faith without fear. Together, we're shifting the conversation from diversity to pluralism and doing our part to ensure that it always remains one of our core strengths as a city. After the program, if you'd like to get involved or learn more, please reach out to me and we can talk more. But for now, I'm going to hand it over to Minaret Foundation's Executive Director, Sharik Abdulghani, who will take us through the rest of tonight's program. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. Good evening. My name is Sharik Abdulghani. I'm the Executive Director of Minaret Foundation. If you can't pronounce my name, I also go by His Highness or His Excellency. So the choice is yours. I want to start off my portion of the program by recognizing a few folks here in the audience who are very near and dear to our organization, but also to the social work that we're engaged in. First of all, Salman Patoli and Nausheen Noor for generously sponsoring this event here today, and which is the reason why we're all gathered. Thank you so much. The good folks of the Child Health Policy Program here at Baker Institute for working with us on this crazy idea and embarking on a journey together with us on juvenile mental health courts and partnering with us on this program. I'd also like to thank Judge Brittany Morris for taking a portion of her time, First Assistant District Attorney Ibrahim Khwaja of Fort Bend County, Liaquat Khan and Dr. Hina Azam from Ibn Sina, who have been such wonderful supporters and pioneers of mental health in South Asian communities, Kyle Dobbs, Chief Juvenile Probation Officer of Fort Bend County, who I'll mention a little bit later in the program, has been instrumental in data gathering throughout the greater Houston area on specialty courts. I'd also like to thank Dr. John Allen, an expert on trauma-related care, who I hope we can engage at a later time on some of our relevant programs, and previously a professor at Menninger's Department of Psychiatry. And finally, I would like to thank someone very special, my wife, Sarah Ali, who's a professional counselor, a beautiful mom, and a constant reminder to me to push the envelope on all things mental health. So can we get a round of applause for these folks, but especially for her. Before we get into our panel discussions, I want to tell you a little bit about our Juvenile Mental Health Fellowship, which is responsible for gathering the data on juvenile mental health specialty courts. I was sitting at a South Asian restaurant in Sugar Land. It's called Asha's Kitchen, and I was having chai with Salman Patoli, and we're having a discussion based upon the work that we're doing at Minaret Foundation. We're at the cusp of getting No Kids in Cuffs passed over the last session, and it just ended up dying because we ran out of time in the legislature. And then we're talking about programs like Handle with Care that we're engaged in. His wife and my wife both end up being mental health practitioners. And so we end up having, by association, a keen interest in all things related to mental health. It also makes for good conversation with our spouses as well. It makes us look smart. So we're having this conversation, and I'm telling him about the issue of juveniles in Harris County. 69% of juveniles who were referred to Harris County's Juvenile Probation Department, 69% have mental health issues. The moment I said that stat to him, he said, "How do I get involved?" That was the first thing that he said. And it was easy, because we needed to study and research the efficacy of juvenile mental health courts. Judge Julie Matthews here was the first one to create a juvenile mental health court in Fort Bend County, and her work has been nothing short of inspirational. And so getting a fellow together, an individual whose only job is to study the efficacy of juvenile mental health courts in the state of Texas. Let me give you a quick snapshot. There's only 6 courts throughout the state of Texas that are registered, because it can take upwards of weeks, sometimes months, just for a judge who volunteers her time, by the way, to do these specialty courts. They have to jump through hoops and hurdles, so it becomes very difficult. And on top of that, the funding from the state of Texas only allows them to see 25 children a year. 25 children a year, that's it. So our goal is simple: get the data, have an understanding of the efficacy of juvenile mental health courts, and then propose a plan in the next legislative session. How can we expand the TACOMI funding? How can we expand specialty courts and help out children all over our state of Texas, instead of just benefiting them here in Fort Bend and in Harris County? And that's what we set out to do. And I'm happy to say that this year, our fellow will be partnering with Baker Institute, specifically this department, to understand the efficacy of juvenile mental health courts, but more importantly, to standardize their processes and present a package to judges all around Texas and to our legislators and say, this is something that works, you can make it happen, and we should fund it. And I am pleased to start and introduce some of our panel members here today. Our first panel is on the future of juvenile justice in the greater Houston area. And today we have the privilege of hearing from panelists who collectively bring a wealth of knowledge, experience, and insight to shed light on the path forward for our community's youth. I'd like to introduce to you Harris County District Attorney Kim Ogg. Under her leadership, the Harris County District Attorney's Office is dedicated to community safety through evidence-based prosecution and equal justice for all. And lately, she's been in the news fighting crime and speaking her mind and making sure everyone can understand all the issues that her offices face, but what she's doing to overcome them. And during her first term, DA Ogg has successfully advanced major drug policy reform, police accountability through prosecution of police corruption and shootings, diversified the leadership of the DA's office, and effected protection for crime victims through legislative reform. Our second panelist here today is Judge Julie Matthews, who is the presiding judge of County Court at Law 3. With a passion for promoting positive change, she is a pioneering force behind the county's first juvenile intervention and mental health court, a specialty court engaging and supporting youth to foster their successful integration in society. And I've been to her court, and I've seen how she mommies these young individuals. And when I say I say it in the most appreciative tone, because when she's sitting behind her, behind what is it called? Bench. When she's sitting behind the bench, right? It can be a very intimidating sight. But when she speaks to them in their own language, she really shows that she cares. And that's really why we're here today. And the third individual here today, Miss Jamie Reyna, is the Chief Prosecutor of the Juvenile Division of the Fort Bend County DA's Office. As Chief of the Juvenile Division of the DA's Office, she is primarily responsible for the prosecution of major violent crimes and sex crimes, as well as the training and supervision of the 7 prosecutors. She also serves on the DA's Murder Squad prosecution team and regularly conducts presentations on trainings for juvenile law for agencies of all sorts. Welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your evening to hang out with us and share your experiences as it relates to juvenile justice. And you know, as I mentioned, that stat that I had mentioned to Salman, 69% of children in Harris County who were referred to the Harris County Juvenile Probation Department suffered from issues of mental health distress. And we can learn so much, not just from our DA, but our judge and our assistant district attorney, on what our city, what our county is doing to further this issue of juvenile mental health that seems to be at a crisis and at a crossroads. So I'm going to sit down with you all, because I don't like speaking from behind the podium, even though there's a nice giant podium here. And let's have this conversation. Let's talk about this issue of juvenile mental health court in Harris County, in the city of Houston, in Fort Bend County, even though Fort Bend County is not part of Houston, but we're going to include it in the greater Houston area. We've got a lot of folks from Fort Bend here today, very appreciative of that. How do judges and attorneys ensure that mental health considerations are taken into account when making legal decisions for young offenders? And I open that question out to everyone.
I'll start. Okay. We are looking at these issues from the get-go from a prosecutor's perspective. Officers have my phone number to call me, and I train them all the time and give them my phone number to call me or any of my team to talk to us when they're out on a call and there are some mental health issues that come up. That's the first step. We try to guide them to what we think is appropriate based on what they're telling us is happening at the scene. The second step beyond that, if a child gets detained in a juvenile detention center in Fort Bend County, our juvenile probation department starts looking for red flags. They evaluate them and start that process. And if they need counseling, they start to provide those services in the detention center. And once they're released from the detention center, they will continue to provide those services to them as part of their release. If the child is not detained and we get what's called a paper referral, my staff is looking to see, are there any red flags here? Is this a referral out of a special needs classroom at the school? And so we're going to ask more questions. We're going to get school records. We're going to get CPS records. We're going to get everything we can to help us determine, hey, is this a kid that we really need to bring into the juvenile justice system? Or is this a kid that we need to refer out and set them up with resources in the community so that we don't have to pull them into the system unless we have to? It goes on from there. If we file a case, again, if everybody's looking for red flags, defense attorney will come in and file any kind of motions that they need to file so that we can get the appropriate kind of evaluations to help us determine if we want to even go forward with the case, and then what's appropriate as far as if we decide that there should be a disposition or a punishment for the child. And then, of course, through the juvenile probation department, through the mental health court that we talked about Judge Matthew establishing, we can start to guide them into those particular services so that we can make sure that this is like a one and done thing for this child so that we don't see them coming back to the criminal justice system, which is the goal for all of us.
Ms. Ogg, how does it work in Harris County?
Well, we've taken an approach with the whole system of juvenile justice, not prioritizing mental health, but prioritizing the way that we treat juvenile offenders from the time they're detained forward. And in Harris County, under my administration, we've started about 6 programs that are intended to reroute kids around the detention and around the record building process of going to court by sending them to what we call diversion programs. Diversion programs are generally education, mental health, family counseling programs. But we do this in cooperation with police and our adult probation department before the child hits the system or before they have to go to court. There's a couple of places that you can stop and reroute offenders. And that's been our priority, is to treat juvenile offenders. Now, when it comes to violent juvenile offenders, they're detained, and many have mental health problems, as do those in programs. But we have taken sort of a simple way of dividing up things, violent versus nonviolent. Violent offenders receive treatment in detention. Nonviolent offenders basically are diverted around the system and directly into a program. Some of those programs are in our communities. One of our guests, Reverend Harvey Clemens, runs one of those programs. He's in the back row. It's in 5th Ward. And through working with all of our school superintendents, what we've done is try to change the paradigm that not every offense that happens at a school necessarily should be a criminal endeavor or a criminal episode for that child. If it's acting out, then that's how we want to treat it. So we do a lot of stopping at the front door by training and working with our superintendents and our school police departments. The actual mental health treatment is not us. We're lawyers. But we've seen that by diverting about 68%, it's so close to the number with mental health problems, by diverting about 68% of our juvenile offenders into these specialized programs, whether in the community or juvenile probation, that we see less recidivism among the nonviolent than we've ever seen before. Unfortunately, our violent crime rate with juveniles is going up, especially murders, and I think it's a direct reflection of the mental health issues that we see in our homes that then bleed into our schools and our streets.
From a judge's perspective.
From a judge's perspective, so I've been on the bench since 2018, and mental health previously wasn't really addressed within our legal system, but it's getting more and more attention as it rightfully should be and need to. So when I was looking into possibly creating a mental health court, or creating a specialty court, we looked into various areas. And one of the things, I spoke to our juvenile probation head, Kyle Dobbs over there, and he said, we have this program in place called Tacomi, but what we lack is an accountability partner. And when a judge come in and tells a family that they must do this, or that they have to do this, or that they have to come and explain a situation in front of a judge, it makes it formalizes a situation. So I step into the role as more or less the accountability partner, a mother, a judge, in making sure that these kids in the system are getting the help that they need, that we identify them early. At the Tacomi program itself had about an 85% success rate. I haven't checked into the latest numbers. We're still very new in Fort Bend County as to figure out if these kids recommit or reoffend. But the whole purpose is to handhold them, get them the services that they need so that they successfully complete probation and we don't see them back in the system. It really does cost more to incarcerate someone that makes sure that they get rehabilitated, and that is a purpose in our court.
Thank you for those wonderful responses, which bring me to a myriad of questions, but I'm not going to ask the 101 questions I want to ask. I do want to follow up with Ms. Ogg on, the Houston Landing published a report, or it was the Houston Chronicle, that Harris County's the correction system is the largest mental health provider in the state of Texas, right? That being said, are there any legal challenges or systemic hurdles that young people who are suffering from mental health distress, whether it be in Harris County or in Fort Bend County, are there any legal challenges or restrictions, or are your hands tied from helping them in any way?
No, our hands are not tied, and I think that's an important distinction to make between today's leadership and perhaps that of a decade before. We want our juveniles to be treated while it's still possible before they've committed some worse crime. And previously, parents were encouraged to call the police when their children were acting up. Teachers, principals were trained to call their school resource officers. Calling the police and bringing in law enforcement is not always the appropriate response for a bad action, especially one driven by a mental health problem. And that's why moving juveniles around the court system and directly into treatment has worked for our county. In terms of resources, we're always looking for more money to treat juvenile offenders, to add to our court system, because we're overburdened and our jail is full. Now, it is not full of low-level offenders. It is full of 17-year-olds and older who primarily have committed violent crimes. All the, quote, low-hanging fruit, low-level misdemeanors, any misdemeanors, they're not in our jail. Our jail is full of, unfortunately, really a lot of violent offenders, many of whom have mental health problems. So the legal battles we face with them are competency and sanity. And those also apply to juveniles, but through our programs of trying to direct people directly, young people, into counseling with their families through our probation department or our community partners, what we see is less of them in the system. And what I hope that indicates is that the treatment that they are getting is actually helping.
Ms. Reina?
So one of the beautiful things about the juvenile justice system, and there was recent legislation too that got rid of even more fees and costs that were attributed to the family once they went through the system, is that these are all provided no matter what socioeconomic background this child has, at no cost to the juvenile or the family. And so once they're in the system, no, those socioeconomic disparities shouldn't play a role at all, because they're going to get those services provided to them, whether the parent can pay for it on the outside or not. And that's one of the things I really kind of stress when I speak to parents in the community is like, look, I know you're upset that your child is in the system, but it's not the end of the world, right? One of my favorite things to do is seal a child's record when they're eligible, but help us help you. Help us provide you the services that you couldn't, your insurance won't cover, or that Medicaid won't cover, or it just simply isn't available because there's a wait list out at the community center to deal with it. We can help you so that this doesn't happen again, and we're not the bad guy, but through the juvenile probation departments across the state, as well as Texana and other services, we're able to get these to these families. Now, are there times where a family who has more access may be able to get their own personal provider because they'd rather have the child's been in therapy and they'd like to go to the child's therapist because they've built a rapport with them? That's something that we may allow. The juvenile probation department will screen to make sure it's a reasonable alternative. And if we don't think it is, then we'll say, no, you've got to go to this particular provider. But otherwise, no, it's one of the lovely things about the juvenile justice system.
Judge's perspective.
So in regard to a child prior to being in the judicial or the legal system, there may have been socioeconomic disparities because of the fact that if they probably didn't help or they didn't get diagnosed early enough or any of those matters, then obviously that possibly had an impact on what happened, how they got into trouble, or how they end up in front of a judge. But once in the system, I believe it is remedied, as Ms. Reina said, they're on an equal playing field. But I still see kids in the system who come in front of me, the parents don't have rides to the courthouse, or they don't have right to take a child to an appointment with the doctor, or those type of things still exist, and we need public transportation would be great. It's one of the things that we're lacking in the state. But there are still resources in that is lacking for parents to get the child the help that they need. But we do everything that we can from our side to make sure that they're helped and provided for.
Making sure that they get the help that they need and they're provided for. Yeah, it brings me to an interesting question. Ms. Ogg, you had said in the beginning, you're a lawyer. You're not a social worker, right? And we can't expect you to do both. It would be lovely if you could do both, right? But we can't expect you to do both. What are the challenges in ensuring that the legal system can address the accountability, maybe even the rehabilitation of these young individuals? Can our legal system do it? Are we equipped to do it?
Our legal system is equipped to process people through a series of appearances and then either trial or plea. And I wouldn't say it's a simple system that promotes changed behavior. It deters bad behavior. That's the idea. But taking a young person, 16 or under, in Texas, to a court in Harris County used to take about 2 years for their case to get through the system. By reducing the number of cases that we actually accept through sending others around the system, we get to it within the first 6 months. Imagine trying to hold somebody accountable, especially a kid who does something wrong, and you say, in 2 years, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. It doesn't deter anyone. It frustrates parents, and I think it diminishes the power and authority of a court to really make an impact on a child and a family. So the more efficient courts are in getting to handling young people, the better. And the big block for all of us is resources. Harris County's 5 million people. Fort Bend is
1 million almost.
almost 1 million. And our systems are not set up for populations this size. And so without growth, what you'll see is delays. And that does not benefit anyone, much less children with mental health problems.
I'm going to come back to you on specifics for that in just a moment. Ms. Reyna?
The question again, Shariq?
Well, the question is, should the legal system be held accountable to helping these children rehabilitate? Can our legal system, our framework, can it help, as Judge Julia was saying, specifically in her JIMS courts, in her juvenile mental health court, that she can take kids from A to Z, or she can try to take kids from A to Z, right? But should our legal system do that? Can it do it even more?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that is our number one goal, and it's written into the family code, right? It's about rehabilitation. And I think we should be held accountable to that, and we do. And the way we handle that is we look at each child and each case individually, and we balance what the victim's rights are, community safety, with what's in the best interest of this child. It may be, we've got to be harsher with the child and maybe send them to TJJD as a last resort. It may be we're going to divert them out of the system.
And TJJD being
The juvenile prison equivalent.
Texas
Juvenile
Juvenile Justice.
we have a lot of
Department.
acronyms.
Right, right. And so it's the tricky part of being a prosecutor, and especially a juvenile prosecutor, is this balancing act, because we really do take what's in the best interest of the child, and we should be held accountable. Now, we've got, things that are built in that we kind of have to work against. For instance, the child's age. The juvenile courts lose jurisdiction at age 18. So when we've got a kid who's 16, just turned 17, and committed a crime when they were 16, we are now bumping up against that age barrier, where we have a very limited amount of time to try to fix, or at least provide services to something that's been broken for 16 years, right? And not just with the child, but we have to look at the family too, and because if you try to fix what's going wrong with the child, if everything in the home stays the same, and that was what helped lead to what was wrong, then if you put the child back into that same environment, we're going to regress again. And so it is a daunting process, but it's one that we take on, and I think we should be held accountable for that. Now, we're not always going to win, we're not always going to accomplish our goals, but I mean, if we help just one of these children, right, and it ends there, and we don't see them as adult offenders in the criminal justice system, and then I think we won, right?
Miss Og, I think Ms. Reyna might be a social worker. Judge?
So accountability, that is definitely a word that I'm not sure how I feel about in regard to the juvenile justice system. I mean, we do the best that we can. Unfortunately, and I hate to say this, there are some kids that are beyond our help, beyond our control, because what I'm seeing as a judge is the end product of everything that has gone throughout their life, gone wrong from the moment they were born to when they end up in front of me. So there's only so much sometimes that we can do. I had a child last week that we had to take him from TJJD, which is the Texas Juvenile Justice Department, which is the child prison, and put him in the adult system. So these are not easy decisions when these kids come in front of me that we have to make. It's really takes a toll on you as a person. I mean, not just as a judge, but these are things that we sometimes lose sleep over at night. But what we do in the JIMS court is really to make sure the prosecutors in our court, as well as the defense attorneys that's appointed to take care of these kids, and the judge and the probation department and Texana, we work together to reach the best possible method to help these children. We devise plans and ways that we can make sure that they do what they're supposed to do, that they get to the appointments that they need to get to, that they get to the counseling sessions that they need to, whether if they need help with their GED classes, that's provided for them. So there's not an avenue that we don't know. I remember one of the probation officers, the child kept coming to court without a belt and was just struggling. Like next time he came in front of me, that probation officer had a belt for him. Like if they don't have food, our probation department will go out of their way to provide somebody that will take care of that need in their house. So there's things that we're doing that we're making sure that they are taken care of as a holistically and approached in such a way that we can help them the best that we can.
You know, helping them the best that you can, which brings me back to something Ms. Og was saying. Y'all are resource constrained. I mean, and it's no surprise. I mean, every government agency is resource constrained, and you're constrained by law. You've got a budget that you can follow. And y'all work, I think it's at the behest of Commissioner's Court, I believe. So y'all's budget is set by Commissioner's Court in both Harris County and Fort Bend County. But y'all are resource constrained. I cited a stat that I believe was before you, Ms. Og. 2020, you've been elected since
I've
2018.
been elected since 17.
Since
I
17,
took
right.
office January 1,
Right.
17.
So we still have an alarming number of children in our system who have mental health concerns. If you could wave a magic wand, if you could wave a magic budgetary wand or a resource wand, what would that wand look like?
Well, I would make our system fit the size of our city and county. It's totally undersized, and it's underfunded. It's a math problem to be solved by taxpayers and leadership in government. And absent appropriate resources, we're simply rearranging the chairs on the deck of the Titanic. So accountability doesn't stop with the offender. That's the goal. We don't want him to do it again, and we want her to get better. So accountability of the offender is necessary for other children too. Accountability of the professionals, especially those of us who are elected, happens every 4 years. And accountability of the funders are also handled through elections. And so it's really up to voters to determine whether they want to elect people who will furnish our system, which is all people-driven, with the appropriate resources or not. And if you don't fund us, we're going to do our best, but it's going to take a long time. And so accountability for the offender is often lost. Accountability as an example to the rest of the kids that he knows and hangs out with is lost. You can have accountability with us electeds, and that's to be expected. But it's really those who hold the purse strings who determine whether your juvenile justice system is going to work correctly. And I think there's accountability to be had there. They've got to come to you taxpayers and basically represent what your interests are. And those interests are, roads, public safety, and the appropriate treatment of juvenile offenders. So it's a balancing act, but it should be driven by our community through elections of the funders and then those of us who run the system.
Ms. Reyna?
Oh, with my magic wand, number one, I've thought about this. Police officers, CIT officers specifically, and that stands for Crisis Intervention Team. More officers who are trained to de-escalate these situations, to handle folks that are in some sort of mental health crisis. They know how to fill out the paperwork and walk the family through emergency detention orders, because if we had more of these officers out on the streets, more of these cases would never come our way. The problem is, agencies are starting to develop these CIT teams, but they're stretched too thin. There simply aren't enough to cover the needs of the community. Because there have been many a times that I've gotten a case on my desk, I'm like, ugh, why did we get this? This child was in a mental health crisis. It should never have gotten this far. So number one, more officers out on the street that can handle these cases. Number two, more funding for psychologists and licensed counselors. I wish we could do a deep psychological dive in all these kids that come across my desk. We just can't. We don't have the resources. Our probation department does the best they can with their excellent psychology division, but there are only so many. And then number three, secure and non-secure placements where we can send the kids that we need to put in a more restricted environment, not just for us, but also for CPS. I mean, they're in a world of hurt right now too. And that way we have more opportunities to address the more severe mental health needs that a lot of these kids are showing us.
Judge, you're constrained by a whole different set of standards. I think you have state level constraint.
The Tacoma Court is funded as a state-funded program, and I think the max that we can have is 14 a month.
Takomi, could you?
Oh, oh gosh, all of a sudden.
It's a big acronym.
Texas Corrections Offender something.
So I named my court, it was too long, Tacoma was too long, so I named it with an acronym I can remember, which is my husband's name. So it's Jim's Court, Juvenile Intervention and Mental Health Court.
Right.
And I think we need a law passed to end these acronyms that just stump all of us.
Yeah.
We start out our young lawyers with a vocabulary sheet of these acronyms.
But Takomi funding is essentially a fund set aside by the state of Texas, specifically the corrections department, to provide funding to issues such as Jim's courts and other specialty courts, but also training for attorneys and many other legal challenges.
I mean, our challenges really are in regard to making sure, I mean, the funding itself is there. I mean, I can only handle 14 kids a month and it has to average out to a certain number a year. So that is definitely a challenge that we have. We could, of course, always use more probation officers, more counselors, more resources available. All of those things would be fantastic to have so that we can continue to do these programs. Another court that handles juveniles specifically in regard to mental health would be amazing, but in Fort Bend County, we're still somewhat small, so we're not sure if we start another court, we'll have the numbers there. You have to qualify into this program. Some of the youths that we have may not necessarily qualify into the program, so there's other constraints as well.
The last question that I'll ask you all is something that's been on my mind, but when we sent out a survey to folks saying, hey, you know, we're going to have this illustrious panel, what would you like to ask them? The main question, or the main feedback that we've got is, ask them, how do they balance? How do they balance between punitive measures and therapeutic interventions? How do you know that a child who sells cocaine at the age of 12 and has a bag of crack just drop out of his backpack, hasn't committed a violent offense, and is selling crack to give food to his siblings because his mother and her father, they just aren't around? So he found a way to feed his siblings. And he suffers from anxiety attacks. And he has bipolar disorder. And this is a very realistic scenario. And a part of this has happened in a case that we've studied. How do you balance that?
Well, on a case-by-case basis, like I said, you look at each kid individually, each charge, and their circumstances. And our system is designed to get all this information up front so that we can make appropriate decision. You know, the probation department's talking to the families, figuring out what's going on there. We're getting school records, we're getting CPS records. We are talking to witnesses or assistant principals too. Is a thing I like to do, is to call the assistant principal. Let's see how the kid has been doing at school. And one, that helps us decide whether even to draw them in or not. And then two, at what point, at what level are we going to draw them in? Are we going to divert them into one of our diversion programs, or are we actually going to file a petition? And sometimes we file a petition because this kid needs services. This kid needs help. If we don't intervene right now, it's just going to get worse, right? And so it'll keep you up at night sometimes, depending on what kind of case it is. You know, we have a lot of kids who commit sexual assaults, who commit aggravated robberies, who commit murders, right? And so then you have to start weighing the punitive measures heavier at that point, right? Because you now have a victim, and a victim has rights, right? And we need to care about the safety of the community. It's not just solely about this child. So it'll keep you up at night sometimes, trying to figure out the right thing to do. And then you get the kids who PTSD from, CPS kids who have this horribly traumatic background, right? But something needs to be done. And so you do it one by one and hope it doesn't keep you up at night, and hope you make a difference.
And from a county that's 5 times the size of Fort Bend.
We prioritize. It's the only way. It's like running a hospital and deciding who you're going to see first in the emergency room. Heart problems and amputees go to the front of the line. That's how it is with murder, aggravated robbery, rape. They go to the front of the line. We don't have all the information we need about the investigation, much less their mental health state, etc. Those cases get filed. That person is considered somebody if the risk is high enough, who should be detained. Now, only about 100 16-year-olds or under are detained in Harris County today. They are all charged with murder, capital murder, or aggravated robbery. So getting them faster trial so that we can get them into whatever is going to happen to them, prison or some kind of probation, needs to happen faster. So we just prioritize by looking at the actions of the child. We do it up front. If they're nonviolent, we try to route them around the system so they get direct services from often not just the juvenile probation department, but a community partner, somebody that we can collaborate with. Public-private partnerships are the way you stretch your money in government. You ask your cohorts who have similar causes, nonprofits, services, and we work together with them directly on these kids. But we have to just prioritize by their actions, what crime they committed. And what Ms. Reyna said about getting them services, that is where I think we've improved. It used to be that you had to call the police to get your child's services in some instances when they were mentally ill. Now, you may call the police, but the police have an option through us in Harris County, through our prosecutors, of diverting right at the front door. And so we're diverting those nonviolent because we just don't have the numbers to handle it, and we find that our partners and our in the community and nonprofits and also in the probation department are handling those kids really well. We're seeing a real drop in recidivism. I think the bigger challenge is, what do we do with these in-game kids where their life is never going to be the same and nobody else that they touched is going to be the same, and they're 15 or 16? That's the harder question. And many do go to juvenile prison. And so I think that's the question our society needs to be asking itself. Do we want to wait till it's too late to give them services? And my answer is no.
Judge?
I think Ms. Reyna explained it. We do, in Fort Bend County, we do look at the kids individually. We weigh what they have alleged to have committed, the offense that they have committed versus, what we have available for them. So we look at all of the avenues available that we can help them in regard to what happens, what we're trying to accomplish through that child, where we can get them to. Are we going to be able to get them to make sure that they graduate high school and go on? Are we going to get them into a placement? Are we going to, in all the avenues, whether they're going to take their GED and possibly learn a trade so that they can become successful. So we look at each child. We are still small enough that we are able to look at each child and figure out what the best route to go with them. There are kids that we have in the system where they may have committed a crime in Harris County, and I know some of the kids, I like to keep them. I said, well, let's keep them in Fort Bend because we can probably give them some of the more, we can provide them more services in Fort Bend County because Harris County does have some of the more serious, and so the numbers are bigger, so they have to deal with the higher offenses, whereas we can, with the lower offenses, some of those things that's in our county, we're able to deal with them better, so we actually keep them. And I do like keeping them in Fort Bend County if I can, to make sure that they get the most help that we can provide for them.
I've learned a lot in this panel. I feel that I'm happy to see that folks like yourselves are at the helm, that you do balance. I think that's definitely refreshing to hear. But I'm saddened that you're resource constrained. I'm saddened that you don't have all the tools that you need. But this is government service. And I see that it's very obvious to me, and I hope it's obvious to the audience as well, that these folks put in a lot of time. And while you may not be considered formally social workers, but I think part of what you do, considering all of the individuals that you see and all the individuals that you have to deal with and the broken lives that you have to see all the time, to me it sounds a lot like social work mixed with law. Thank you so much for your time. We very much appreciate your perspectives. Folks, before our second and our last panel today, of scientists and researchers. We're going to have a brief break where you can go outside and enjoy, you can go outside and enjoy some mocktails and some desserts. You utilize the washrooms, come back in, or this is the best opportunity if you've ever wanted a picture with the DA. This is the time. This is the time to make it happen with the judge and the ADA as well. Just don't ask her to autograph your chest, and everything else is okay. Thank you so much. We'll reconvene here in this room at 6:45. Well, I'm going to try to get our program started. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much again for taking a portion of your evening to learn about such a critical topic of juvenile mental health. You know, earlier we had a pretty great panel. We had District Attorney from Harris County. A District Attorney from Fort Bend was unable to make it today. He had a commitment that came up, so he sent his subject matter expert on the issue, and she provided us with a wealth of knowledge. And then we had Judge Julie Matthew, who for us was sort of the starting point in getting involved in juvenile mental health, because we are going through Commissioner's docket in Fort Bend County to see what's going on during COVID, and we see on the agenda item that there's an issue related to juvenile mental health court, and anything related to mental health at that time was getting sidelined, right? Which is a nice way of saying it. And so we researched the issue, and this is several years ago. We researched the issue, talked to our faith partners, particularly our pastors in Fort Bend County, and we said, hey, listen, there's something really big coming down the pipeline in Fort Bend that we just don't have, and that's a juvenile mental health court. And so unbeknownst to Judge Julie, Commissioner's Court that day was packed with imams, with pastors, with rabbis, who one after one said, we need this, give her the funding that she needs and the approval that she needs. Completely unexpected. Went from a vote that was going to be 3-2 against to 3-2-4, right? And that was the beginning of our juvenile mental health court journey here at Minaret Foundation. That panel spoke specifically from a legal perspective. And oftentimes that's all that we see, because we consume the news. We see Twitter, we see TikTok, we see Instagram, we see Facebook, and that's the side that we see. The headlines, DA's office does this, child prosecuted at the age of 12. We see all these ridiculous headlines. And I don't know if it was just me or if y'all felt this as well, but when our panelists were saying child prison, every time those two words are used together, it sends a tingle down my spine. I don't think those two words should be together, but the reality of our situation is that they are together. And so our second panel and our final panel today will talk about juvenile justice and its challenges and opportunities. And it's focused on the complexities and challenges surrounding juvenile mental health in the greater Houston area, but particularly the outlook of young individuals within the justice system. And fortunately, we have two esteemed researchers with us today who have deep experience, one in child welfare and one in adult welfare and mental health. And so we're joined by Dr. Christopher Kulesa, who's a scholar for the Child Health Policy Program right here at Baker Institute, where he carries out research in child and community health policy. His current research project focuses on the influences of built and social neighborhood environments on health outcomes. I'm going to say that one more time because I had to read it at least 3 times, right? He carries out research in child and community health policy, and his project focus right now is on the influences of built and social neighborhood environments on health outcomes. He also investigates the health needs of children in kindergarten to 12th grade with the goal of expanding access to health and social services. His other research interests include state politics in the U.S., and he has published peer-reviewed articles on state campaign finance law and teaches online classes in American politics and public policy for Purdue University and Indiana University in Indianapolis. And we're also joined by Dr. Nausheen Noor, who you may recognize from an earlier slide as being the namesake for the Salman Patoli and Nausheen Noor Juvenile Mental Health Fellowship. Dr. Noor is a staff psychologist at the Menninger Clinic and an assistant professor in the Menninger Department of Psychiatry. It's a lot. behavioral sciences at Baylor College of Medicine. In her work, Dr. Noor treats adult patients with severe mental illnesses through therapy and comprehensive psychological assessments. Her current research focus is on the impact of community-based mental health interventions on mental health outcomes in adults with severe mental illness. Her research has been published in peer-reviewed journals such as the Journal of Personality Disorders, Psychology Research and Behavior Management, and Occupational Medicine. Welcome, and thank you so much for being here. You know, we heard so much from Dr. Og. I just promoted her, or maybe I downvoted her. I don't know what I just did with DA Og, ADA Reina, and Judge Julie, and they spoke a lot about juvenile mental health from a legal perspective, of kids in child prisons, of kids getting locked up, of kids being put in handcuffs, of unfortunate decisions that they have to make, right? Just because of the nature of the crime. I want to ask you if you can discuss the role of community programs and support in addressing mental health challenges amongst juveniles, particularly those from disadvantaged programs, because we heard a lot about what happens when they get there. But when they get there, I can't expect a corrections officer to help a child with bipolar disorder. And I can't expect our DAs to handle a child with bipolar disorder. That takes a whole different set of circumstances, and DA Og spoke specifically about public-private partnerships. So could you talk briefly about the role of community programs and support in addressing the mental health of these individuals?
Oh, sure. So thank you so much for having me today. So they play a really important role, of course, when it comes to creating an alternative path for juveniles that are that have been identified as needing some kind of interaction with the juvenile justice system, right? So it is a place for individuals that can have an alternative from going to what we consider to be a traditional way of incarceration. One of the challenges, of course, that we have now today with the traditional facilities is they're typically isolated and in rural areas and away from the individual's families and away from services that are particularly within the community.
You're
right?
talking about these child prisons.
Child prisons, right? Particularly like TJJD facilities are in rural areas, particularly away from their families. So what these programs are able to do is they're able, for one, to be able to bring them closer to their family and to their community and to help us to rethink the way for which we treat individuals as not just as punitive, but also being able to address the influences and the ways for which individuals that are going through the process interact with their community and help out target those particular influences that might deal with either unemployment, lack of opportunity, so on and so forth. These particular programs are particularly helpful also in the sense that it allows for more individualized based care that, as you said, you're not likely to be able to see within TGGD. In the traditional facilities, we have heard, in the news media that there is a major problem with understaffing, that there is a difficulty with keeping individuals in the system, and they're just simply usually not trained to be able to handle the care of people within those facilities. So those community-based interventions allow for much more personalized care and also allows them to be much closer to home and not as much in isolation. Now, I do want to say really quickly that there are some challenges associated with them. For one, of course, the demand for them is much higher than is typically the demand for them is much higher than what a lot of these programs can supply. And also, too, there is not oftentimes there's not a formal way to inform many of the parents and the individuals that are having an interaction with the juvenile justice system that they know that they exist, depending on the location, depending on the area. So with that being said, I mean, they are, of course, extremely helpful as an alternative, and they do, I think that they do a lot to address many of the more community concerns, but I do think, too, we need to be able to provide more support through them so that they can serve more juveniles.
So a quick follow-up to your question before I ask Dr. Noor about the adult role of trauma and community support. Could you speak specifically to partners and programs, Dr. Kaleza, that take place at these rural child programs? Give you an example. so we have this program called Handle with Care that we're working on at Minaret Foundation. And one of the things is, one of the benefits of enrollment into this communication mechanism for school districts is, as our organization, we offer them wraparound services through convening community organizations, saying, hey, look, the Boys and Girls Club or the YMCA, perhaps Catholic Charities can provide you with support of these children who experience trauma. And then we work with third-party organizations to design a cohesive program for these school districts. I'm hearing you say that these child prisons are in rural areas. I got to tell you, there's not a lot of nonprofits in rural areas apart from the local church. How do you muster community support for child prisons? I got to say, I hate saying child prisons. Can we come up with a code word? Evil, something else? TJJD? We'll just call it TJJD.
Right. So it is a little bit tough because in rural areas, right, they oftentimes don't have the resources in order to really create comprehensive programs, right? So one of the things that you need to be able to do is find ways for which either you can have different partners collaborate across counties, right? Or have different ways, particularly in the larger counties, to be able to set aside certain resources. But here's sort of the, I guess, a little bit of the trick with this, is that partnerships are formed in some cases relatively quickly, relatively easily, right? There are many different organizations and groups that are out there to help and support our youth going through the juvenile justice system, right? However, many of them oftentimes operate in silos. They don't necessarily communicate with each other as frequently as they should, and they don't always know how to best muster together their resources in order to properly help out those that are going through the justice system and interact with the justice system. So when they come together, they have to be able to come together with a purpose, and they have to be able to come together with a practical policy solution. And to your point, that many of these centers are in rural areas, right? And you want to make sure that individuals are back at home in their community rather than going out to one of these isolated areas. They need to be able to keep in mind a particular policy solution that's going to be practical. And we've seen it done. There are other states that have used a more community-based care system that was done all within the budget. Missouri did one, for example, where it was relatively successful. But we really do have to make sure that whatever we are proposing is indeed something that would be viable and something that would resonate with a lot of these rural areas. And I think one of the things that would resonate, of course, is just generally keeping kids closer to their families, right? I don't think that we would hear, at least I would hope to think that we wouldn't hear of too many individuals that would say it's a good thing to isolate them and keep them away from their home lives unless that there's something traumatic going on. Generally speaking, you'd want them to be closer. But again, it really ultimately does come down to resources in many cases, and it's just a matter of, again, being able to pull resources together with these groups and making sure they go in with a purpose and they understand what's practical.
I was with, I actually, Pastor Clemens, I think I was with you at, we were meeting with Chief Acevedo, or it was Chief Acevedo, and he was telling us about a child who was 11 or 12 years of age who had committed assault in a school for the second time around, and this time he got locked up. And he was sentenced to a year in prison in this rural facility. And that entire year, his parents were undocumented, and so they didn't visit him. And so this child went into prison and for a whole year had no contact with his mother and his father and his siblings, and they wouldn't have a way to make it out into the middle of nowhere anyways. Dr. Noor, I can imagine that a lot of these children who enter our justice system face long-term psychological impacts on their mental health, especially the ones who have experienced trauma. Can you provide us some insights, particularly those who have suffered since childhood? Because your main population is adults, it's not juveniles. But you see these adults who have undergone trauma, and I imagine they didn't just undergo trauma last year or last month. It's been since they were a child.
Right. And so I'll take a step back and talk about trauma a little bit. So when somebody says trauma, the first thing that comes to mind is physical abuse, something, or sexual abuse, some kind of a violent thing. But another thing that I see in my clients a lot, and something that seems to be even more powerful than physical assault, is neglect. it's like the child doesn't even exist at home. So think about a child who goes to school, comes back, and there's nobody at home to take care of them. There are nobody asking, how was your day? These are some snacks for you. Like the child has to be the parent of younger siblings, etc. So that constitutes as trauma as well. But it's something that we typically kind of overlook. We don't really talk about that. And so just something to hold in mind. So we're not just talking about something bad that happens to you, but also something that you did not get, like companionship and love and care, which all individuals need, but especially little kids. So moving forward, some of the things that you see in children as they get older, and it's easy to say, like, yes, this person went through some traumatic episode and so now they have depression, or they have an anxiety disorder, or they have PTSD. But if we were to go through those similar circumstances, wouldn't we be reacting the same way? Wouldn't we also be anxious and depressed if somebody was hurting us constantly? If somebody had put me in handcuffs when I was 11 years old and kept me away from my parents for a full year, I'd be angry. I'd be sad, I'd be depressed, and I'd be very, very scared. So in my work, it's less about diagnosing, and we have to diagnose, but that's less important, and it's more about contextualizing those symptoms and humanizing them, validating. So the adults who've had any kind of childhood trauma will exhibit a host of symptoms. It can be depression and anxiety, it can be bipolar disorder, personality disorders where they don't have a sense of themselves, they don't really know themselves, it's hard for them to like and accept themselves too. And then in more severe cases, substance use, suicidality, but also physical concerns. So it's not just mental health. There's research that, rheumatoid arthritis, irritable bowel syndrome, all of those are connected to childhood trauma, even cancer. There was a study which showed that people who were going through conventional cancer treatment, but also receiving some trauma-based intervention, did better overall in treatment than those who were just going through cancer treatment. Again, it's preliminary research. We don't have a lot of data on it, but it is sufficient to understand that childhood trauma has far-reaching implications on our lives, and something that gets triggered a lot throughout our lives if it's not treated, if it's not taken care of.
That's a lot. IBS from childhood trauma. Even though the data is preliminary, cancer, medical issues. I know I don't know about y'all, but when I get stressed out at work, or I get stressed out with family, or I'm just enduring a lot of stress. I remember when I was going through my graduate exams, I realized that every time I undergo a lot of stress, I catch the flu, or I get a cold within a week. My body reacts in a way that's not happy. I remember just closing out my mortgage. We closed out our mortgage, and that took almost 6 to 9 months, and I'm self-employed, so I had to jump through many hoops. To celebrate, we flew out to Italy, and I got sick in Florence the entire time, and it was just horrible. I just wanted to tell that story, is why I'm telling the story. But what I'm trying to say is, in my life, I see that stress and trauma gives me health issues. I can't imagine for these children, 12 years of age, in juvie, can't even see his parents. But one of the comments, and I think the consistent feedback that we received when we did our survey, but also in the middle of the break, many of you came up to me and said, but how can we stop them from getting locked up in the first place? Right? We don't want to see child prisons. We don't want to see children in handcuffs, which, frankly, when we passed No Kids in Cuffs in the last legislature, just the image of a child, because you can't handcuff a child with metal handcuffs. You have to use tie wrap, and you have to get them at their elbows, right? That's how you handcuff a 6-year-old child, right? Just the image. When we took a pair of handcuffs and a child into the chambers, into the hearing chambers, and we were about to put the handcuffs on that child, the legislator was like, "No, don't do that." Because no one wants to see that. No one likes the image of a child in prison or a child in handcuffs. Dr. Kulesza, can you tell me steps that the legal system can take to identify and divert? We know in Harris County there's a diversion program, right? But can we divert them before they hit that diversion program?
Right. So a couple things with that. It's a multifaceted problem. For one, we have to realize or recognize the fact that we just generally have in the state of Texas a mental health desert, in the fact that we don't have enough mental health care providers for juveniles. Even looking at our schools, 98% of schools do not have sufficient mental health professionals as what's required by, or what is recommended by TEA. 98%.
What does that mean?
So we don't have enough counselors per student. So the recommendation from TA is 1 per 250. 90% of schools in Texas do not meet that recommendation.
One counselor for 250 students?
Yes.
That sounds
Reasonable?
terrible already.
It is,
Reasonable,
right.
completely.
So there's two different things with that. One, of course, is being able to provide care once we recognize that there is a child that needs mental health access. And two is just generally access, right? But even when access is provided, it doesn't necessarily mean that somebody who is below the age of 18 is going to interface with those services. So some of our research at the Baker Institute has seen that even if there are services, children oftentimes do not seek out help. And there's a couple different reasons for that. For one, there's many children who think that, well, the feelings that they have are either not important or they're going to go away sometime in the future and they don't need help, right? The other instances is just simply that there's a stigma, right, around seeking mental health care services, right, among many children. So a couple of the things that we need to do, of course, at least on the mental health side, is one, of course, increase access, but destigmatize mental health for kids and reinforce the fact that if they need help and they need assistance, that they should be able to get that assistance and that they should feel comfortable about getting that assistance. Now, there is no, of course, silver bullet in order for you to be able to just one day have a child feel comfortable. But however, we should be able to create interventions and be able to create a long-term strategy in order for us to be able to do that.
I'm going to ask you a follow-up question. And this is an unscripted follow-up question, but I know you, Dr. Kleza, to be very quick on your feet.
We'll see.
There's three organizations in this room that I can identify. We have Mr. Salim Kudia with IEIT, which manages 6 or 7 private schools in Houston. And then we have Hina Azam, and we have Hina Azam and her associate here from Ibn Sina, Irfan from Ibn Sina Clinic. It's a community clinic. We just saw its 1 millionth patient. And then we have Pastor Clemens, who manages Pleasant Hill Baptist, who's a senior pastor. Huh?
Center for Urban Transformation.
And Center for Urban Transformation, right, in Fifth Ward, right? And my experience with both organizations is they care very deeply about children, and they're focused on transformation. But my experience with Pleasant Hill Baptist Church is that it cares especially a lot for the young men, especially those who exit the system. How can these 3 types of organizations provide that support for children who are undergoing trauma?
Right. So as you were mentioning, one of the programs that I apologize, but one of the programs that you offer is to help young men. Mentorship is one of the key interventions and one of the key ways that you can really make a positive impact on people's lives. So I really thank you for being able to do that. In terms of being able, I guess, broader as a collaboration, I think you could all work together to try to help turn some of the, not just the rhetoric, but the philosophy about how you can turn people's lives around. So really quickly, in the 1970s, there were several pieces of research, or there was one particular piece of research that came out and said that there really wasn't much that we could do in terms of keeping those that are interfacing with the juvenile justice system from reoffending later. We know that is not true, but a lot of that is still ingrained in our minds, right? That is still ingrained in a lot of policymakers' minds. And indeed, recently, when money became available at the Texas in the Texas legislature, in order to reduce the number of, or in order to reduce the stress on TJJD, what did they do? They wanted to increase traditional the traditional number of beds at facilities, but that's a different point. The different organizations can come together to try to shift the idea that rather than juvenile justice being punitive, in that it needs to be a case of course, rehabilitation, but also to understanding that the way the legal system thinks about this is somebody had a choice to be able to go out and commit an offense, right? That they were acting as a rational actor and they made an internal decision to go and say, I did this. But that is not necessarily the case. Many of course, the vast majority of those that are in the juvenile justice system have mental health, either moderate or severe mental health concerns. It's up to 69% now as of 2021 from some of the work that was done by the Texas Advisory Committee of the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. And also, with that being said, that it is purely punitive, it is not rehabilitation, and it is considered to be that, oh, well, ultimately, there were no community influences, that there was nothing about their personal lives that may have that led to this. So I think when we look at those social determinants, I think organizations like this can help impact communities and get to those more local social influences that eventually lead to individuals potentially committing an offense later.
You've said a lot, but and definitely quick on his feet. Isn't that what I said earlier? But what you said, one of the things that comes to mind as you're speaking of this is what happens after it's too late? What happens after they've entered the system, when they've been given that punitive punishment, when they've been told you've got to do one, you've got to be incarcerated for a year, and then they grow up. If we had addressed it before they went into lockup, before they got into that fight, before they started having those issues in family and magic wand and invade everyone's privacy and try to counsel everyone, right? It's not possible. So what happens after they've crossed all of those markers and they've reached adulthood? Do you find that when these types of children, and frankly, these types of children could be our neighbors. Mm-hmm. They could be our own children who suffer from trauma, who've witnessed things that they shouldn't have witnessed as a young child, and it causes them to do something that they regret and the family regrets. When they cross that line and they reach adulthood, is it too late? Is the damage already done? And if so, or if not, what could have been prevented in childhood?
I don't think it's too late. A lot of damage has been done, but it isn't too late. Suppose we can talk about so earlier I was talking about trauma, and one of the things that happens when you have been in a traumatic situation is you feel helpless and alone. Most of us, we live long enough, we'll go through something very traumatic in our lifetime, but not all of us will develop serious mental illness like PTSD or even have persistent depression, right? And it has been shown that most of us do recover normally. It is the absence, again, being alone, the neglect, the absence of companionship or having somebody who can take care of you during that time, who's able to you can share your mind with them and feel less alone, who can hear you and not gaslight you or invalidate you. Those things are really important. And when that happens, most people recover naturally. They do not, even if they're going through something very traumatic, they get better. So the antidote, so when you have an individual who has, say, a litany of mental illnesses because of that childhood trauma or physical health issues, making them feel opposite of how they felt when they were traumatized, when they were being held in handcuffs, or when they were in solitary confinement, or when they were detached from their families, to make them feel less alone, to make them feel heard, seen, and not just, I work with young adults who most of them have not gone to prison. And even then, they have felt invisible most of their lives at home. So something that my older clients will recall from their younger days is, I was told to be seen and not heard. So I had to be a good girl or a good boy who was quiet, who didn't create issues for the parents, right? And so really in therapy or in your relationships, not just in therapy, but making them feel that they matter, that what they're saying is true, it's valid, supporting them through that. And so you're talking about trauma interventions,
Yeah.
right? And so there can be any kind of trauma that a person goes through. The very first step of treatment, or the very first way to intervene, no matter what stage in life they're at, is to make them feel less lonely, is to hear them out, and to validate them and not to gaslight them, right? And then once the person feels that they can trust you, they feel safe with you, that you will not hurt them, you will listen to them, even when they get upset, you don't leave, they're more likely to open up more. And sometimes that's all you need. You need a good venting session, right? Sometimes to feel better. And a lot of times these kids, even adults, that's all they need. Somebody they can trust, somebody they can sit with. There was a study, and this is something I'm quoting from Pakistan, my work there. There are a lot of children who have run away from home who were addicted to sniffing glue. I don't know if anybody has heard of that. And then their intervention was literally just mentorship, somebody just sitting with them and talking to them. All they needed was some love. It's just somebody who sees them. And that is all they needed. And then most of them gave up that habit. And so really starting with whichever relationship, it doesn't have to be with a therapist, whoever you come in contact with, but feeling heard, validating them, making them feel safe, is step one. And then there are more evidence-based practices, like there's one very popular one for children, and that is trauma-focused cognitive behavior therapy. But the ones that I really prefer are the ones that include the whole family system. So one of the things, Chris, you were talking about, where children are not interested in therapy, some of the reasons you listed, but another one that comes to mind is that they're the identified patient, they're the identified delinquent. And that creates a lot of distress, right? Like the circumstances brought me to this. The parents brought me to this. The family system did. But I'm the one who's supposed to be in treatment. I'm the one who's supposed to have, learn techniques on distress tolerance. What about the parents? What about the families or the environment they're going back to? So really involving the families when we are working together to treat that one person, the identified patient, the identified delinquent, and that is most important.
It reminds me, what both of you said about mentorship reminds me of a sermon I heard once where the imam said, he asked a question in the audience and he said, do you know how a child spells love? T-I-M-E, right? Just that mentorship opportunity is so valuable. And I believe our churches and our schools and our community clinics have the opportunities and the network to provide that TIME and show them love and help them through this time that they need of healing. Right? Dr. Kuleza, you have a strong background in public policy, and you and I have had several discussions on the previous Texas legislative sessions. If you had an audience, imagine this audience is transformed into the House of Representatives and to the Senate, right? And they're all very busy with some kind of a trial or another happening right now. And you had the Lieutenant Governor and Governor Abbott's pen without the governor, just the pen.
Just the pen.
You had the pen.
Okay.
What would you do?
I would try to make sure that we had increased access for mental health services around the communities and the schools, for one. I would also try to break the model of the system being only, just considered it to be punitive. Reducing the number of rural-based facilities in the state of Texas and increasing the number of community-based interventions to bring those that are interacting with the juvenile justice system closer to their families, closer to home, closer to their communities. I know that is not easy, but there have been other states that have successfully had models, and we're trying it right here in Harris County. What I would just say, very, basically, is that we know from data that the current system does not work, right? Environment is incredibly important. those that interact with the more traditional incarceration processes are much more likely to recommit an offense later on. So if that is the case, we should be going much more towards interventions that are based in evidence, and I think a much more community-based system with more mental health support would be the way to go.
And when we see these children enter the system, then they miss school, and then they go to school, and everything that they've learned in the system they do in school, and then we see the midpoint of the school to prison pipeline as well, which plays a big factor in juvenile incarceration and how they turn out as adults, right? Dr. Noor, you work on a significant amount of evidence-based treatments. And so let's imagine that the House of Reps and the Senate is still here. We still have the Lieutenant Governor and Governor Abbott's pen without the governor. What treatments would you want funded by the state of Texas? The ones that show the most promise in helping adults, especially those adults that have had significant childhood trauma.
Instead of treatments, I would go for funding preventative stuff. We have a lot of evidence-based treatments, and it is hard. You can have the best therapist and the ideal client who wants to change and the best therapy, and it's a lot of work and takes a lot of time. So wouldn't it be great if you could prevent it beforehand? So to answer your question, what I would want to invest in more is schools, mentorship opportunities, obviously, but also providing systems, helping systems to support the family system. It takes a village to raise a child, and sometimes the mother is distressed and the father both parents have 3 jobs. What's happening to the kids? It's solely falling on the parents to raise them into these perfect kids who would never have any issues. So really having systems in place that support families to raise kids in a way that if they need some kind of help, it's therapy that they need for a couple of sessions and they're good, not some serious trauma that keeps happening over and over again for 16, 17, 18 years of their lives, and then saying, here, now is your chance to get better. Get this evidence-based treatment with this perfect therapist and you'll be good. Wait, why aren't you getting better? You've had 12 sessions. Insurance is not going to cover you anymore. You get what I mean? So I would rather that we invest in our children and our communities and the systems to support families versus to come at age 25 and say, now you need to hurry up and get better.
I got to tell you, it sounds like a lot of the times, it goes back to what Ms. Ogg said in the earlier panel, this can only be done with public-private partnerships, right? It has to be our academics such as y'all and our legal professionals, but also our churches, our community centers. Center for Urban Transformation has to play a significant role. The same thing with IEIT, Ibn Sina, and so many others. We have to form those partnerships between from the justice system and to our mental health professionals and try to find ways to bridge the gap. Because if we don't do it, no one else will, right? Is also what I'm hearing. Right? There seems to be a lot of problems that don't have any solutions. There are a lot of theories, a lot of ideas of what needs to be done, but we're either resource constrained from funds, or as you're saying, 96% of our schools don't even have one counselor for 250 students. Sounds like we have a lot of problems, but the best way to move forward on it is talking about it, shedding light on it, making sure that everyone knows what's going on, and for you in the audience to be able to tell your friends and have these conversations with your pastors, have these conversations with nuns in your church, with leaders and lay leaders within your faith-based communities, but also your community centers as well. The conversation has to continue going. Otherwise, as WAPO's slogan is, it just dies in the darkness, right? We'll never know about it. We'll never talk about it. It's clear that both of you have a tremendous role to play in solving and conquering this issue, if we ever can, from both the child side and the adult side. And it's further clear to me that the only way that this gets done is the way that Ms. Ogg says. We have to come together in a public and a private partnership. Thank you so much for your time and spending a portion of the evening again sharing your thoughts with us. before we close out the program, I'm going to ask my brother, Pastor Clemens, to come and give us an interfaith prayer. But I want to special thanks to all our panelists for taking the time to speak with us on such a critical issue. Thank you to the Baker Institute for making this a priority and for partnering with us on this program. To Salman Potoli and Nausheen Noor, thank you so much for your generosity in sponsoring this event and for continuing to sponsor our Juvenile Mental Health Fellowship. And I have two clear actions before Pastor Clemens leads us in prayer. First, if you want to get involved in one of the projects in this Juvenile Mental Health project that we're working on with the Baker Institute, in any of the projects that were mentioned by Raha, even if you have just 1 hour a month to give, that's it, and no subject matter expertise, please speak with Raha. Raha, could you raise your hand? She would be delighted to meet your acquaintance. And the second action, in my tradition of Islam, in my faith, in the Quran, it says, وَإِن تُعُدُّوا نِعْمَةَ اللَّهِ لَا تُحْصُوهَا. And if you were to count the blessings of God, you would never be able to. Blessing upon blessing, those we recognize and those that we don't recognize. My second action item for you is please take a moment to say a prayer for our city. We are going through an extreme time with this ridiculous heat and the 2-minute rainfall, right? But our city is blessed with panelists such as these and the panelists before, with individuals such as yourselves who care enough to come to listen to what is happening to our children here in Houston. Take a moment to say a prayer for our city. Shake hands tonight with someone that you do not know. Let's continue to make our city smaller and more successful by embracing and wishing well for one another. Thank you all for coming today. Pastor Clemens, may I ask you to lead us in a prayer?
Certainly. If I might have just one point.
Please.
Let us thank Sharik for his leadership and for pulling this together. And for the work not only that you've done tonight, but throughout all the years that I've met you, you've been involved in working this great work at our city. So thank you so very much. You are encouraged and invited to go along with me as we go to the Creator of the universe. We're grateful, my God, our God, that you have blessed us with the intelligence and the intellect to realize your reality and to come to the understanding that the earth is yours and the fullness thereof, the world and they that dwell therein. So we thank you, God, because you're the one who founded upon the floods and established it upon the seas. And so, as being part of your creation, we ask God for the wisdom and the knowledge to know how to care for it, each soul, each individual, to give us the strength to make the resources available, that we might reach suffering humanity in every corner of our city, in every corner of our state, in every corner of our world. Bless these scholars who have devoted themselves to scholarship, that they might know how to meet the needs of suffering humanity. Bless each who are interested in this, and then as we dismiss ourselves from this place, we pray, God, that we would never dismiss ourselves from your presence. This is each of our prayer, all in our own way, but a few of us in the name of Christ. Amen. Amen. Thank you, my brother.